We're pleased to welcome the author of The Sojourn, winner of the Dayton Literary Peace Prize 2012 Award in Fiction. His other books includes A Long Retreat in Search of a Religious Life, a memoir about his 8 years in the Jesuit order. I have to talk to him about that because I spent about 6 years, not in the order, but under its control. I want to talk to him. And The Letters of William Carlos Williams to Edgar Irving Williams, 1902-1912, winner of the 2009 Louis Martz Prize. He grew up in Pennsylvania, has lived in London, and now lives with his wife and 3 children in Massachusetts, where he teaches in the Arts and Sciences Honors Program at the great Boston College. To introduce the 2013 fiction winner, please welcome Andrew Krivak. Here he is.
Good evening, and I wanted to echo what Maza said, which is just thank you for having me come back to Dayton. This happens to be my 3rd time back after last spring being the 2nd. And it just feels like a second home, and I'm grateful to each and every one of you, and it's so wonderful to see everyone again and to say, it's nice to see you again. The imaginative reach of literary fiction is a hand, not of fact ultimately, but of possibility. The possibility of telling a story that floods light into unlit corners of imaginations and tells truths beyond the either-or of truth or lie, coming to life as much in how a story is told as in what it contains. The Orphan Master's Son is a novel wherein possibility emerges continually in the face of impossible truths. Is this true? The fictional dear leader of a real North Korea asks the character who is the face and voice and name of what is possible in the novel, and then demands, out with the truth. To which this character, whom we dare not even call the main character, for he is all things and no one in name, replies, I have given you a piece of me, and now you know who I really am. Operatic in the layers of voices that we hear and unfolding like an intricately woven tapestry of faces, visions, brief glimpses of a world wherein the simple beauty of the sun in the morning and nightmares of a darkness, yet too horrible to imagine, exist next to each other like lovers walking side by side, too afraid to hold hands. The Orphan Master's Son culminates on the truth of self-emptying sacrifice, powerful in that it remains only a piece of what is given. But it is this piece, and yes, I want you to hear both meanings in that word, the piece of what is broken off and the piece that comes at the end of a struggle. That the orphan has found his story, that the totalitarian state for the moment is overcome, and we the readers know that we have glimpsed the truth of what is possible in an impossible world. A world in which we cannot forget, no matter how hard it is to imagine, that except for starvation, they didn't have a care in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you this year's winner of the Dayton Literary Peace Prize for Fiction, author of The Orphan Master's Son, Adam Johnson.
Hello, everyone. I love the sound of my voice on this. It's so wonderful to be here. It's difficult for me to express that, honestly. I was listening to Gilbert King's words and Andrew Solomon, and I was sitting right there thinking, I need to be a better person. I think I can do better. I can be a better parent. And I was also thinking, my work should be more important. So, and I think that's a legitimate feeling, having listened to both of those persons. And there's a really special atmosphere here that comes from the goodwill of the people that are putting this together. Sharon and Mark and the Board of Trustees and Nick and all the volunteers, all the readers, Marie McCoy, thank you for being a judge, and Michelle Latilde for being a judge. Thank you, everyone. But there are these moments, just last night we were just in the Marriott little pub, and we writers were listening to Tim O'Brien talk about narrative. And it's maybe hard for normal people to know what that moment was like, to really be in the presence of a hero, you know. People have asked me, what's the best reading you ever saw in your time at Stanford? And, I say Tim O'Brien, in 2010. And when they say, what's the second best? I say Tim O'Brien in 2002. And I really, really mean that. He's one of those figures that's going to cast a shadow over all of us. But there were these little moments earlier, like just speaking with, Tanya and Wendell Berry about Wallace Stegner at Stanford, these little pieces of wisdom. And the transmission of literature between writers is a very rare and beautiful thing. And I felt that every moment that I've been here. So I'm personally honored to have my book recognized in this way. Thank you very, very much for that. I want to, thank my wife, Stephanie, as well. She's not here. But when I put on this tuxedo today, I was reminded of the 5 times I married her wearing it. And she'll probably have to watch this on a video someday, but Stephanie, I will marry you 5 more times. It was almost 10 years ago that I read the story of Kang Chol-Wan, a man who was interned for 9 years in Camp 15, which is a labor gulag in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The way that North Korea transfers terror from the regime to the individual is through the family. When one person commits or is perceived to commit a crime against the state, the whole family goes to one of these camps, places for which there are no trials or sentences because that's it. 50,000 people toil in Yodok, which is Camp 15, and there's another 50,000 or so in Camp 1418, a sister gulag. And these places are real. It's morning right now on the other side of the world, and all of these people are waking to go into the timber fields and down into the mines. Reading Kang's life was disorienting and very defamiliarizing for me, an average person living my average life in America. What was this strange place, North Korea, I wondered, and what did I know of it? I had heard that the famine struck in the 90s. I'd heard of that. I knew there were some big bombs in North Korea. I'd seen the marionette of Kim Jong-il sing "I'm So Ronry" on Team America World Police, which is a portrait not too far from the one I had in my mind of Kim Jong-il, a man with bouffant hair and elevator shoes and jumpsuits, and who was famous for shooting holes in one, right, at North Korea's lone golf course on Yanggak Island. I had seen videos of North Korean children trained to robotically sing and dance while proclaiming that they lived in the greatest nation on earth, a workers' paradise with universal health care and total happiness. Portraits of evil, absurdity, buffoonery, insanity. That was all I had received of the American media with regard to an entire country and its people. But then I read Kang's memoir. Kang never did learn who in his family had fallen afoul of the state. It was perhaps an uncle, but his entire family was sent away. Kang was only 9 when this happened. He was too young to understand what a labor camp was, which is why he insisted on bringing his beloved fish with him. And this portrait of a boy entering perhaps the worst gulag on earth with his aquarium was really the first human look I'd had at North Korea. And I had a little boy, and I just started to care. And I think it's funny how easy it is to not care about other human beings. We know what's going on in the DR Congo and Sudan and Somalia and many places in the world. We know the hardships that people are facing when we drive past a prison or a hospital or an impoverished neighborhood. Yet, it's not until we actually know the struggles of an individual that we become invested. And the way we do that is through narrative. We can shake our heads at the fate of a nation, but the story of a boy can kind of just change your course a little bit. Kang's story got me reading more, and I quickly devoured a ream of books about North Korea. I realized I didn't know much about Korean history or culture, or about the Korean War, a dark chapter in our nation's history that, beyond a television show, we as a people have not really confronted. Most of the books I read about North Korea focused on economics and politics and military issues, and very few were just about people. And then I discovered that the stories of average North Koreans, the ones I was hungering for, weren't in books. They were online. They were being gathered by aid workers and missionaries who were assisting defectors out of the northern border across the Yalu and Tumen rivers. Here were the personal narratives of average North Koreans, stories of long hours at sewing machines and self-criticism sessions and guard duty in the cornfields and rabbit breeding on the roofs, and stories of living in housing blocks. Here were stories of the arduous march, as the famine was known to them. Stories like these weigh more than you would think. When they're placed in your hands, they're like stones that you have to carry around. And I wonder, where's the point at which, after you've begun to care, that you start to act? I'll never forget the story that did this to me. It was the story of a young woman discovering suddenly that she was starving, which sounds strange to me. It was a very strange story to come across. She lived in North Hamgyong province, and her family was foraging the hills for food, which was a normal daily activity for them. They hunted wild yarrow and ginger. She was with her parents and two uncles when the five of them found a rotting pear on the ground, and they gathered around as the father cut it into 4 slices. And then he apologized to his daughter that there was not a slice for her. And that's when it struck her that this wasn't hunger, that this was starving. She asked him point blank, "Are we starving?" And he denied it. And she suddenly realized how foolish she'd been, how naive to think that other people were starving, but not her family and not her. And she said she became very angry with him. "Admit it," she said. "Admit that we're starving," she told him. And even though this is an experience as farther than anything I had ever experienced, I felt like I was right there. And this story was like one of those heavy stones that you have to carry around. And as a writer, there's only one way to unburden yourself of stories like this, and that's to try telling them. And I tell my students that the odds are quite low that a person who has an important story to tell will also have the abilities to tell it. That means people who happen to have a gift for storytelling also have a duty to tell the stories of others who, for whatever reason, cannot tell their own. And I wondered then if I couldn't take all the real stories I'd come across and fashion them into that portrait I'd been looking for, of a normal person from North Korea, an average citizen from the lowest of stations. And just the notion of this plagued me with doubt. Who was I to write this story? That was a question I asked myself every single day for 6 years. I wasn't Korean. I had never been to Korea. I didn't speak Korean. I'd never known hunger or war or an intense physical pain. And when I tried to starve myself to see what hunger was like and not eat for a couple days, which is a big deal for me, it wasn't real because I knew I could eat whenever I wanted, you know. These doubts never went away. But I knew from my research that North Koreans were not allowed to tell their own stories. In fact, we don't have evidence of a single unauthorized play or poem or book making it out of North Korea in 60 years, in 3 generations. Even in the worst days of the Soviet gulags, writers risked their lives to create works that responded to the darkness and absurdity around them. Solzhenitsyn wrote in the gulags and had his book smuggled out. There may be an artistic underground in North Korea, but we have no evidence of it. This means that no North Korean has read a novel as you would think of it, a book that explores the human condition, that speaks back, that holds a mirror to society. In fact, after the Japanese occupied the peninsula in 1910, they made Korean literature and music and art illegal. All the Koreans were taught Japanese and given Japanese names, and then after that 35-year period in which their own culture was stolen from them, then came World War II, partition by the superpowers, the Korean War, and in the North, 60 years of a Stalinist dictatorship. So for those people, they've been separated from their own cultural tradition for a century. But what of those who make it out of North Korea? They too face great challenges in telling their stories. These are people who have been taught their entire lives not to express their inner thoughts. They're traumatized by their escapes. And because their freedom comes at the expense of those who are left behind, they suffer survivor's guilt. And it may be another generation before they recover their narratives. If it's true that we find it hard to care about others without the personalizing immediacy of their stories, how do we approach an entire people who have been silenced? I do believe that writing outside one's own experience is to trespass in the lives of others. Writing across racial, cultural lines, things like that come with great risk. But I still ask myself, who am I to write about the lives of people so far away from me? I started asking this other question, though, that stands beside it, which is, why aren't more writers trying to lend their voices to such a people who have been so silenced? Right now, it seems to me it's only through the imaginative reach of narrative that one can vault these borders of the Kim dynasty. And it's only through narrative that we can restore the humanity of a people who are all too often reduced to abstractions and caricatures in our popular culture. I think my book was maybe one of the first books in our society to attempt to do this. And perhaps one day we'll look back and say, oh, what was Johnson thinking? Or Johnson got it all wrong. And I hope if that happens, it comes from a place in which many people have attempted to give voice to those who have lost it, and that hopefully, most importantly, North Koreans are free enough to tell their own stories. And that's the story I'm looking for anyway. And I hope that day comes soon. Thank you.